Good afternoon, everybody. We're happy to see you again. We are about 1/4 of the way through the session. I have with me two colleagues right here, Senator Erickson, who's the chair of the Energy, Environment, and Telecommunications Committee. He sits on Transportation, Trade, and Economic Development, was part of the Governor's McCleary Work Group. Republican, and because we are Majority Coalition Caucus, I have Senator Tim Sheldon, a Democrat, who sits on the Transportation Committee, the Joint Transportation Committee, and also the Vice Chair of the Committee, Energy, Environment, and Telecommunication, and on the Rules Committee.
I'm State Representative Dan Christensen, the Republican leader in the House. I want to thank you for being here. We've had a little bit of a busy week. It's going to be Education Week in the House. We saw a few bills go out yesterday. We've got a few more probably on Wednesday. I've got with me today Representative Shelley Short, who is our House Republican Caucus Chair. And then I've got one of our newer members, Representative Melanie Stambaugh from the Puyallup-Sumner area, who has turned out to be, she hit the ground running. She's been very busy, and I'm looking forward to your questions today.
Senator Perlett, Senator Erickson, can you clarify where the caucus stands on the clery bill that came out of the House yesterday? And Senator Erickson, are you still on the work group, and if so, why weren't you in this meeting that was discussed yesterday on Friday?
So I'll start out by saying the caucus has not discussed the bill that came out of the House yesterday. And I know that we have a variety of members following that issue. One of them is Senator Erickson, but we as a caucus have not discussed it.
Yeah, as far as I know, I haven't gotten a letter from Lieutenant Governor yet. So I think I'm still on it.
So why weren't you there on Friday?
Well, I think I'm on that committee. I was the one who I think raised the most concern about some of the directions with regards to the work group. A lot of good people meeting, I think, in good faith. But I think it underemphasized the work we've already done in the legislature in terms of education funding, really turning the ship around, and didn't recognize that aspect of dedicating 3/4 of government growth to K-12 and higher ed compared to what we used to do here in Olympia. The other issue was creating this outside task force that would provide a recommendation back in 2017, which is a difficult thing to do because you can never obligate a future legislature to begin with. So, I think there are a lot of good things we can talk about, and the caucus is going to take a look at that legislation when we get a chance to look at it in caucus.
As far as not obligating future legislatures, hasn't the legislature already promised on its own without the court to do a lot of these education changes by 2018? And how does that play into the conversation about whether to include that deadline into whatever plan Bill for McCleary is passed out?
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, the legislature can always write legislation that sets goals for future legislators to try to accomplish, and we're doing it. I think this is the disconnect that happened with this work group, is the great work we've done for the past 3 years in terms of funding education. I mean, it's record increases in education spending, and that was my greatest concern, was we lost that in terms of the message the public is hearing. So I think we're doing a very good job moving forward. Still more we can do, and we're going to take a look at that legislation and see if it fits into a policy that moves forward. The other concern I had about the work group is it got caught too much in talking about dollars and cents and not enough about educational outcomes for kids. And that needs to be combined with it. So it's not just a fiscal exercise, it is an education exercise for better results.
Okay, I got a multi-part follow-up. One, why did Senator Litzow say it was a no-go to the Democratic heads? What are your feelings on the Section 4 thing, because that seems to be a key thing, and the thing where you said about too much dollars and cents? Isn't dollars and cents the big loose end that has to be dealt with? That's the part that keeps being put off.
So, John, I would answer your question. I can't speak for Senator Litzow. I mean, I didn't know what he said. And number two, I have not read the bill, so I also can't talk about Section 4. I mean, I sit on different committees, and we read the bills normally on the committees we're on and move forward, but I'll go back and read Section 4 now that you called it to my attention. And the last question was...
Let me just clarify in terms of my quote about dollars and cents, right? It's not just about dollars and cents. It's about educational outcomes for our kids. And I think that some of the work that's been going on through this work group and others has been too focused in on dollars and not enough on results for kids.
Okay, but isn't one of the main big issues here doing, some sort of overhaul of the property tax system, and that's what everyone's hung up on, because that's part of the McCleary thing, is you have to have a stable, stable revenue source, and that's what the, at least that's what the property tax shift started out as, and now it seems to be in limbo
Let
right
me
now.
clarify that. If you look at the McCleary decision, it says nothing about property taxes. There have been some people who have tried to discuss property taxes going forward. That is not included in any of the legal decisions that we have got from the Supreme Court,
Okay.
if you put any credence into what they said. But so you are not providing an accurate picture of what the court said with regard to property tax issue and local levies. Nothing in the McCleary decision specifies that local levies cannot continue as they are today.
Okay, but
Just saying.
financing it seems to be a thing that everyone keeps,
Do we have
I mean,
another
the
question?
D's keep saying, we gotta take care of the finances. Your side seems to be shrugging it off.
I think the
quite a
ultimate goal is to do no harm, and these are big, big discussions. And whatever the decision, the final decision that the legislature decides to do in the future, the ultimate goal would be to do no harm. And that's not easy. All our school districts across the state are, in some ways they're similar, in some ways they're uniquely different. So this is not a simple issue.
So
Who
is it
has another
possible
question?
To move forward, do you think it's possible to leave this session without you guys taking a vote on a plan for next year and just come back next year and deal with it then? I mean, is there talk of that in your caucus at this point?
We haven't talked about that in our caucus. I mean, we will
You
be
only got
listening to
2
the
weeks left,
bills.
So I mean, I would imagine.
Right, we have a lot of things to continue. The nice thing about a short session is it's very easy to have a priority list, and education is definitely on that list to discuss.
Okay, but have-
Section 4, just to help out a little here, is the section that talks about actually doing a fix in 2017. So is there not commitment to actually including that part in the bill from the Senate Republican side at this point? Is there ambivalence about that?
So just to clarify, one more time, we're going to take a look at the legislation as it comes to our caucus. And the second point is we are not shrugging anything off. And that narrative, I think, is completely false. What we have done in the past 3 years is record expenditures into K-12 education. We have turned state government on its head from a government that invested, 3/4 of all new spending into general government and 1/4 to K-12. We have flipped that to 3/4 for K-12 and higher ed and 1/4 for general government. So that's a pretty big shrug. That was a lot of work. That was called heavy lifting, to get that accomplished. So we're going to build upon that going forward. We're going to look at this bill, and we're going to focus in on outcomes for kids and how we make proper investments. That's end of my education comments, since I chair the Environment Committee and Energy.
Who else has a question?
There's a hearing tomorrow on a bill for transgender people access to bathrooms, transgender people using bathrooms. Is that still a priority? The bill would reverse the policy by the Human Rights Commission that was recently gone into effect. Is that still a priority in the Senate and in the House? Any idea whether that's going to gain any traction over there?
In the House, we've been told by the chair of the committee that it would go through that she's not willing to even hear any bills related to the subject matter. So I think at this stage of the game, unless we can get the chair to change her mind on what her intentions are there, that it's at this point, it looks like it would have to come out of the Senate, at least initially.
Is your main issue related to the policy itself or the way that it came about? I mean, if you could expand a little bit about how and why this became a priority for Republican caucuses in both the House and the Senate.
Well, first of all, for me, I didn't even know about it until we started to get all these emails, and I can tell you we are receiving a lot of emails on this issue. Now that I've had the opportunity to look at it a little bit more, the process is what really bothers me. The fact that this rule was done without, I guess I would say, in a way that is not as that transparent or thorough when you normally go through a process like that. And we still have staff looking into the different details of that. There are a couple of bills out there. I know I signed on to one that Senator Braun has sponsored that has to do with rulemaking, something that a copy of what Colorado has done. I think you have a bill, so we probably will have hearings in the Senate on this issue.
So if I might just add on to that, I think Senator Parlett dealt with the process question very well, but there's a bigger, to me, a more concerning piece, and this is in no way about young men and women who are questioning their identity, right? I think I think this whole process, frankly, has victimized them further. But what I'd like to say about the rule is so broad that a business or a private entity, if you have a member of the opposite sex going into a restroom they choose to use, they can't even question the individual. So if you think about an adult male wanting to use this opportunity to victimize young women, or really women of any age, our daughters, our granddaughters, our aunts, the list goes on. I think the entities can't even step in and do anything until they have actually been victimized.
If something criminal occurs in that circumstance that you're mentioning, aren't there laws already on the books that deal with that behavior?
But here's the problem. I wouldn't disagree with that, but here's the problem with that. The business can't even step in and say, what is this individual doing in this restroom? What you're doing is you're setting up, I believe, another class of victims of any age for people who already look for ways that they can, be deviant with other people. And the unfortunate thing is, I'm not worried about the transgender community. That's not my worry here. My worry is those who are going to portray themselves in a way that they're not just to gain access to do harm. And a school or a private entity is powerless to be able to do anything to prevent that until there has been an action that has occurred. And I just like to say, from both sides of the aisle and both sides of the rotunda, we've done a lot over the years to make sure that our women and our young women are not victims. Whether it's domestic violence, whether it's sexual victimization, the list is very broad. And to me, this just overturns that. So it's just very unfortunate that the Human Rights Commission took this tact and didn't allow any ability to give any kind of flexibility or options to entities that they might use in order to meet the spirit of the law. So it's really unfortunate that they've gone this direction, but I think there's significant issues, process, and safety issues as a result of this
Is
rule.
there a compromise that you would make, some sort of bill that could?
Well, it'd be
accomplish
nice,
both
but the chair won't even hear the bill. So we can't
In the
even.
Senate, there's a hearing tomorrow, so tomorrow's hearing in the Senate.
Well, just Representative Short, I think that the bill that I introduced is the compromise bill. It's very brief, it is very short, it simply repeals the rule from the Human Rights Commission, right? And it says they can't take action, but allows local governments to continue to operate in ways that they see fit. So we don't get into the details of trying to define who gets to go where. We leave that up to local governments, local school districts. So in the case of Representative Jenkins, and her concerns about access to shower facilities at the YMCAs in her district, they would still be able to have a local policy to be able to handle that, but they cannot say the state requires them to do that. And it's really a process and a substance issue. And with this rule, Washington State becomes the only state in the country that has a state mandate on this particular issue. And so the process portion is to get to this big of a leap without the process of actual open public hearings, you have a problem. But then the substance also to become the only state that has a statewide mandate on it is also troubling to many of my constituents.
Yeah, I just mentioned on that, we have 49 districts in this state, and they're very, very different. You get to, my district is the most rural district in the state of Washington, for example, and it's still on the west side. We have east side districts that are very different. So this is, I think, an issue that people our constituents are very interested in and very worried about, but it is not something that I think that one size is going to fit all, so.
Go ahead.
One thing I'd like to lead into, just going into different tact, there's a group of women in our caucus, actually all of the women in our caucus, who have been getting together in the interim to just talk about issues that are concerned in our communities. And we've done some amazing things. Rep. Wilson has a bill, Women Helping Women Act, that takes the sales tax from women's products and puts it into domestic violence. Gina McCabe, OSPI curriculum for prevention of sex abuse of students in our schools. Not that that happens in the schools, but just of our students. And Representative Kochmar has actually some bills she's working on with Casey Kasem's family that deal with visitation of elders when visitation's prevented. And I'd like to turn it over to Representative Stambaugh because she's got some really great things she's working on as well.
Well, as part of this caucus discussion of how do we empower women, how do we empower families, and ultimately how do we empower communities, my piece of this has been diving into access for women to contraceptives. It's been in looking at maternal mortality, and it's also looking at our juvenile justice system. But when I look at my most recent bill that's for access for women to contraceptives. It's allowing pharmacists to play an integral role, I believe, in being that option for women. There are several bills that are bipartisan support for these bills, both in the Senate and in the House, that are saying, let's have this discussion about how are we encouraging our women to make their own health decisions. What we found with access to birth control, women have higher education achievement, higher career achievement, and higher wages over their lifetime. And if we can equip women with the options of making their choice on what contraceptives they want to use and have access, reducing barriers, like long waits for getting into the doctor, or locale issues, if they're in rural areas trying to access to their primary physician, or something that I find very important is access for our college women who have left their hometown or their home physician and gone to college and now have to say, okay, how am I going to access the needs that I have in making decisions that are right for my life. On a second front, here in the state of Washington, maternal mortality doesn't get much discussion, and I have a bill that I dropped that looks at making a review commission, because in California they did a similar process, multidisciplinary, multiple ways of looking at how do we reduce maternal mortality, and they found in doing this study and implementing the work group suggestions, they reduced it by 2/3. In Washington state, we have about 650 women that die within 1 year of either before or after giving birth. And if we can reduce that by 2/3, we are making great strides for empowering women, empowering families, and empowering our communities.
Is that Bill 6396 that is due Thursday? Is that related to is that another approach to the transgender bathroom issue?
Is that Senator
6396, what's the number? I'm not sure.
So that's basically would just require AG review of new agency rules and set a 1-year expiry on them. And I was just curious, it's due for hearing Thursday.
I think that's Senator Braun's bill, which I spoke to before.
That's the one you were
Right.
talking about.
Mhm.
Thanks.
I don't know the bill numbers.
And there's another bill introduced today by Senator Warnick as well.
On education funding again, I know you said you were going to talk about it more, but you
Oh, no.
are on a work group dealing with this issue right now, and all sides, Senate Republicans and Democrats in the House have said that all deadlines have been met by the legislature on this school funding issue. How can that be said when the court is holding the state in contempt over the inability to submit a plan on education funding at this point?
I guess I would say sometimes we question what the court does.
Look, we've increased spending by, depending on which, I've heard from 33 to 36%. I've heard those numbers thrown around just in the last 24 hours from various legislators and the governor, just since 2013. If we're not going to acknowledge the massive strides that have been made, historical strides that have been made, and the billions of new dollars that are going into our K-12 system, and if the court's not going to start acknowledging the fact that we have made tremendous strides towards solving the education issue. Remember, it was not that long ago, prior to even the McCleary decision, that it was Republicans that were saying, we've got a funding problem with education. There was a bill that was introduced in 2006 or 2007 that was titled Fund Education First. Why? Because we knew there was a problem. We also were watching the fact that the trend, as was mentioned earlier, is that the new money that was coming in was going away from education. Only a quarter of the new money coming in was going towards K-12 education. 3/4 of it was going somewhere else. And so we've been watching over the course of the last not just few years, but decades, frankly, where there's been this trajectory when it comes to properly funding education. It's been a problem. The other thing too was it had never been defined. Education, you can have all the people in this room, ask them their interpretation of what is basic education. You're going to get a different interpretation from every person. It was nowhere in statute. Now, granted, some of us may or may not like what the decision of the court was and their interpretation of what basic education currently is. That being said, since the decision was made, we've increased spending by at least 1/3. And we are on a trajectory to solve this problem. But as the bill that was passed out of the House yesterday was reflecting, is that we all have acknowledged, all four corners of this building have acknowledged, that there is very important data that's necessary for us to make the last piece financial decisions. That's what the bill gets to. Yes, there are still a couple pieces in there that many of us have some concern about, the date certainty, especially with respect to how the court has been interpreting the law as they have been in the last few statements that they've made. And then also is whether or not the teacher shortage should be part of that study because it was not part of the original McClary decision. So as we've seen and we saw during the when the education team has been meeting over the course of the interim, at the last minute there were a couple things like capital budget that were added to it, the teacher shortage was added to it, the date got thrown in there, and we're saying we're already on the right trajectory. We already know what the court says about the dates. We already know about the 18 certainty on this. And, you know, we've got what we could out of the House at this point. We're going to see how the Senate now deals with it. But I say, hey, we've been doing tremendous work. We are on the right path.
Okay, but why was the date, you had 34 members vote against it. I can't remember which side you voted on.
I was a no.
Yeah, so I thought,
Yes.
but I wasn't 100%
Oh, you
sure.
should have guessed that.
I was guessing, but I was.
But my only concern that I've had with it, yeah.
Essentially, the date.
Mhm.
Why is the date?
Why is the
Yeah,
data? Why is the data
I mean,
concern? From my perspective, and I can only speak for myself personally on this. One of the reasons why I have some concern about the date itself is that it's already been. We've already in the previous decisions. We've already got dates in there, and the concern that I have is under our Constitution, we are not to bind future legislatures. As you heard, if I may, John, if you heard on the floor speech that was given by Representative Manweller yesterday, you've got 58 new members in the House alone since 2009 when the laws were passed that actually built the whole McClary case, that were dealt this deck of cards, or having to, decisions were made years ago by legislators that put them in a box, or us per se in a box. And now the question is, are we going to make sure that we are also living up to our constitutional obligation, which we all swore our hand, you know, when we were sworn into office, and part of that is not to hold future legislatures, not to bind them. And so the date has some concerns, probably more so with how the court has been responding to this. And the reason why I say this is the court continues to move the goalpost. The court, every time they've made a decision on this, has added something else to their decision. And so the concern that we have is, okay, court, if you're already going to do that, why would we add on top of this? And so, you know, while I still am supportive of the underlying piece of legislation, getting the information that we need, I'm glad that the capital piece got removed from it. But I still believe that we have some concerns with the date certainty, for sure.
Okay, but one, the date is a legal deadline, and two, I had this problem with Representative Manweller's logic. If 58 people weren't around in 2009 to vote for the bill, that means no one was around here since 1980. That would, if you pass a law, it should remain the law until you remove it. And just because that by that logic, you would nullify practically every law prior to 1980.
There's still the obligation clause that we as legislators, I think, need to take seriously. And if we are as legislators going to continue to go down a path where we're obligating future legislators on date certainties, on dollar certainties and whatnot, that goes kind of against the grain as far as every legislator I've talked to about this. Some of them are a little upset about what's happened in the past. I do believe, though, that even setting that aside, I think the court has been very clear. I think the law has been very clear. And I don't think adding a date in this stage of the game is going to make any difference in the outcome.
So, John, I would say I voted no on that bill in 2009, but my first year in the legislature was 1997, and an educator that I have a lot of respect for showed me the pie chart and how education funding was going down from when I started. And then as I continued to watch that, it continued to go down. We were spending a lot of money on low-income healthcare and other issues. When the MCC formed, we took that as a priority, also working with the House, to recognize that we did need to increase K through 12 education, and we did that. But we also paid attention, as you saw in the last 2 years, to higher ed by freezing tuition and so forth. So we have made education a priority. The legislature has done that. We are moving in the direction of a positive way, and I think we can do that without dates. I think we're on the right path, and I think that's the difference of opinion. We could argue about dates in a bill, But the point is, we recognize we have to pay more for education, and we are moving in a positive direction. So I don't think we can discuss this any further.
I think we can just a little bit. If you
Your
take
show.
out that date, which is actually, I know the courts mentioned it, but that was something, as you all are aware, that the legislature put for itself, unless I'm misunderstanding. 2017, if you take that out, aren't you reneging on your own deadlines and that you've set yourselves that apparently have not been broken or unmet this entire time?
Not at all. You know, we are making great strides, as everybody's highlighted here today, right? And I think there are a lot of people in Olympia who don't want to talk about what happened, you know, from basically 2000 until 3 years ago, and they want to talk about what's going to happen in the future, and they want to ignore what's happened in Olympia for the past 3.5 years in terms of education spending. So they're trying to change our conversation away from the great successes we've had over the past 3 years to other issues. And we're going to continue working on it, right? We're going to go out there and do the things that need to happen. We're going to try to make it more fair in terms of how our teachers are paid, with or without this legislation, right? So one of the things that's going to happen is we are going to make the commitment to keep working on this and to fix some of those aspects that some people have concerns with or without this bill. I mean, if this bill passes, you create a study and says, well, look at it next year. I enjoyed the headlines today about the House bill, you know, in the newspaper. So some of them said legislature takes action. They didn't take any action. What you did is you formed a framework to have a future conversation. And if that's the most important legislation we're going to deal with on education this year, that's a problem. And I know Senator Litzow is working on a lot of great stuff when it comes to educational outcomes, continuing the leadership on how we continue increasing funding and making it a priority in the budgets. And that's what we're going to be focused in on, not really getting wrapped around the axle on a piece of legislation that creates a framework for a future conversation.
And if I may too, I had a surprising conversation with some of my teacher friends from my own neighborhood here just a couple weeks ago on this, and we ended up together after an event that we were at, and they were asking me, Dan, what are going to be the big focuses? And they were teachers, and I said, well, of course, education is going to be a huge focus. And then they asked me, okay, what have you done so far? And when I told them that we had increased spending by over a third, every one of them was shocked. They're like, why haven't we heard that? That's my question to you.
We wrote about all of that.
Well, I have got, and I appreciate that. But my point being is that I have got teachers. Why is it then if you're saying thank you and that you're saying some things, why are the unions not saying it? Because this person, if I may, because they're being given talking points that we're not funding education, that we got to do way more, but they're not being told what we've done. And here's a person who was a senior teacher, almost 25, actually just over 25 years as a teacher, very involved, and didn't know, and none of them knew that we'd heard a little bit, but a third, they were shocked.
It's more important to know about this information rather than for them to see the effects of what the money is allegedly doing.
I think that the question should be asked is if the legislature is putting billions of new dollars into education, that if even our own teachers are not aware of what's going on there, they should be asking, where is the money going? And that I think is a valid question, because even the court said it's not going to be just about the money. The court said in the original McClary decision, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, that it's not going to just be about putting more money into education. It's also going to be about where is the money going so that we get the best outcomes for our students. And that, I'll say from my perspective, and I know from our caucus, that's our number one focus. The money that we're putting in, and there's going to be more, but our number one focus is we want the best outcomes for our kids. And that's where, with a combination of the new money and the reforms to education, that's what we should be focusing in on.
I might say something about on the Senate side with the coalition caucus. The majority coalition caucus was formed over 3 years ago, and we purposely had a very focused agenda of transportation, education, and the budget. And I think we've been very successful by focusing on education, and as has been laid out here, all the accomplishments we've had. It's this is all about politics down here, okay? So being all about politics, it's sometimes about trying to tamp down what some successes were, or to raise expectations and talk about other things. But the facts are, because it's in the budget, and I think that is something no one can deny. In the budget, the increases to education have been fantastic over the last 3 years, and it's been a trend that is going to continue. And I think we've been leaders in that, and I think sometimes we don't get any recognition for it, and it's hard to explain to the public sometimes because they hear it all from the other side that education is not getting any funding, and it is. They
They need more AP reporters in their internal Uniserv newsletters. they get better information that way.
I'll just encourage more people to read their local newspapers.
Well, that would help also.
You should get a bonus.
You're now the head of marketing.
One more?
Yeah.
One more question before we end?
Please go ahead.
Okay, this is actually for Representative Short on your bill for the transgender bathrooms and everything. I'm actually wondering, because you were discussing that it's kind of more important to address this issue in terms of seeing women as victims for people who would be entering their bathrooms. I'm wondering if you see addressing victims in the terms of not addressing it for who is most affected through statistics, because transgender people face a lot more sexual violence and discrimination than women actually even do. If you think addressing women over transgender people when looking at those statistics would have more of an impact in some way.
Well, I'm not saying it has to be one over the other. You know, what I'm saying is that the rule, the way it's currently drafted, has created very vague circumstances where our young women, I'm sorry, you hear of perverts all the time, and I'm going to use that term, that utilize, there have been articles, a lot of articles that have stated that they have used these kinds of circumstances to say they're questioning their identity, and then they go in and they do other things, whether it's voyeurism, you know, attacking a person. I don't think it's an either or. You know, I think people would like it to be an either or. I don't think it is, but I think what the rule didn't do is it didn't balance the outcomes for both. I don't want anybody to be intimidated, harassed, you know, any of that kind of thing. I just think that the rule itself did not deal with those things equally, and there is an unintended consequence. So I'd like to see us go back to the table on it, frankly, but there isn't even an opportunity to do that. I don't want anybody to suffer in that way, you know.
So one last question. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just curious. I guess it's two-parter, but they're simple parts. I'm just going to shoehorn them in here because it's the end. So first one is, I've heard the implication here several times, and I just thought I'd ask about it. Is the position that funding-wise we've done enough, or that we're about to have done enough, that we're really close to having done enough? I've heard that it's too much about dollars and cents. I've heard the ratios have been flipped. I'm just curious, am I reading correctly into that the implied statement is that we've done enough? And then my second question.
I would say no.
Okay.
No, we're on a good road. There will be more money in the future, but we expect even better outcomes because that's where we should be going.
But take a look at what the budgets have passed by. What have been the votes in the last couple of years for the general fund budget? Some have passed in the Senate 44-4. We've had unbelievable, I think, bipartisan votes for the budget. And the people that are voting for the budget represent practically all 49 districts around the state. So I think the legislature as a whole realizes that we can come together and make very large progress on these issues.
The second part I have was just about transgender bathroom issue. Is there, can you speak to just a little bit about the conflation of transgender people and perverts? This happens a lot. I've noticed that it's subtle, but I see it over and over again.
No. That's not to say that the transgender individuals are claimed that way. I'm just saying that there are people who I would say want to do harm to young men and women, and I think I correctly classified that, but I in no way mean the transgender community to be in that light. Because they are going through serious issues. I cannot imagine what they're going through, but actually I think this victimizes them by pushing them into a spotlight that maybe they didn't want in the particular way it happened. You know, any kind of rulemaking, however sensitive a topic is, you have to follow the statutory things and give a transparent process for everybody to participate in. I would say actually the way the Human Rights Commission did this did a very disservice to the transgender community. And I think it's been harmful, but I in no way am going to equate, you know, a transgender person with the description that you used. I save that for individuals who are trying to be lurid and do things in a bad way to our young men and women.
And
Okay.
if I can add real quick on that, just to kind of close out, I've received, as I know all the members here, numerous emails of concerned constituents and parents and grandparents, but I've also sat down with members of the transgender community, trying to find a way in this conversation to say what is the best path forward. And the members from the transgender community shared that safety is their ultimate goal, and they, just as those who are concerned, want to ensure safety for those who are, concerned, and those who are part of the transgender community. And I think we can come together on safety, and I look forward to working with members in both the Senate and the House to find that, when that discussion was unable to happen under the rule and how it was put into place.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.